after a while, Viet decided that he just wanted to manage the band. So then it just became Aaron, Robbie, myself. And then we needed a drummer. So then we knew Rob because he was a friend of ours. And so he started playing drums for us when You Will Never Know Why was released. But yeah, before then it was like we had either played drums or we had a drum machine to do the beats or yeah. So then that's how we got through to Rob, and then we kind of disbanded after You Will Never Know Why, because everybody else, life took over. People got married. Some of us had kids. So then yeah, so we just sort of moved away from each other, and yeah, we just didn't do any shows, and we would just do our own thing music wise, where we just record on our own pretty much, and then post it on SoundCloud. So really, it was that interview and the groundswell of listeners that brought myself and Robbie back together. And so yeah, then it was just down to the two of us. But with the computers and sequencers and things, that we could just produce the sounds without like necessarily needing a drummer or a bassist or yeah.
Cool.
So of course, if we ever tour, then we will need to find session players for drums and bass or yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was your guys' relationship with James Agron and like the rest of Darla Records?
Oh, well, we've known each other for years. Since we released Halika, it's just always all our albums were released through Darla because, they're a small label and they're like family. So we actually work really well with them. And what's cool about them is they're not, unlike major labels, Darla Records, they just sort of keep the entire creative process entirely up to us. So, that's really good. So anything that we want to do artistically, they're so supportive of, and they're just they don't get in the way of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then yeah, they're pretty supportive, and we just like working with them because again, they're honest. So, and also the roster that they have, pretty cool. Like they release stuff from Robin Guthrie, and they're like a major distributor. So yeah, I mean, we're pretty happy. We have a good relationship with James and Darla Records. So yeah,
So
they do a lot for us.
Mm-hmm. What were some of like your original thoughts going into the creation of Sweet Trip?
Well, it started out where we all, again, in the early parts of Sweet Trip, we all sort of like had a mix of who writes songs, and everybody wrote songs. And so it was just kind of inconsistent in that way. So we didn't really, when we decided to just become Sweet Trip, we figured that most of the songs would be Robbie, because he was the best songwriter out of everybody. And so I think it was like our thoughts for creating Sweet Trip was basically to create a uniformity with the music, instead of some guy playing this and then we are playing each other's songs. So I think just that was just sort of like the thought process, was like we need to be more consistent, sort of like the Beach Boys. You got Brian Wilson as the main guy, and then yeah, the Beatles, same thing. Lennon, McCartney, everybody wrote songs and collaborated. But yeah, there was just Sweet Trip was really like us acknowledging that we need to just Robbie would be like the main songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Hi, this is
Yeah.
Robbie
Oh.
here. Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
Hello.
ow.
Just to add to that, also, as Valerie explained earlier, there was a time where we were trying to find a bass player to fit our sound, and we couldn't find the right person to play with us that would have the same musical personality as we had. And so, like during that time when we were trying to be traditional, we were also making all this like weird drum machine tracks and things like that. And then came a time where we had plenty of those tracks. We had enough tracks to just decide to completely scrap the traditional band route and just concentrate on those electronic sounds. And at the time, we had a different band name, but a lot of not a lot, but like all our demo tapes were all labeled Sweet Trip. Just because that was a name that I was just messing around with, I wasn't really serious about it. So I remember distinctly the day that I came over to practice, and I showed the guys a cassette tape with some of these electronic sounding tracks, and I think that it was like I think a light bulb went off. Viet, I think it was, who suggested forget trying to be a 4-piece band, forget trying to be a traditional band. Let's just play these songs instead. That's when he decided to switch from drums to bass. And then he also said, since you're labeling all these cassettes as Sweet Trip, well, why don't we just call the band Sweet Trip? And that was really the motivation to become what we are now. And all those tracks that we had that made us become Sweet Trip,
Yeah.
most of them ended up being our first album, basically.
Oh, Halika, is that your first album?
Yes.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Speaking of Sweet Trip, I know this wasn't in the email, but does Sweet Trip mean anything or is it just a cool name?
So I'm originally from Panama, and when I was a kid, I used to hear the older kids, the older teenage kids, cousins and classmates and things like that, joke around or talk about drugs. And one of the drugs that they will talk about and joke around was I think it was LSD.
Oh,
And then the nickname for LSD in my country was translated from Spanish into English, the tasty trip. So when I started recording music on a 4-track, I remember that name and I thought it was really funny, but I didn't like the tasty part, so I just switched the tasty part to sweet because somehow that sounded a little less ridiculous, and that's how that came to be.
so like your combination of these shoegaze and like alt rock with electronic, that's a very interesting combination. I just want to know what led you all to incorporate this electronic sound into your music.
I think that when we were growing up musically in the 90s, we were getting exposed to electronic music as well as shoegaze. And I'm listing those two genres like very broadly, because we were listening to like almost everything that came out of those two genres. And I saw some similarities between the two. A lot of like the early 90s stuff, 90s techno electronic stuff was gearing towards ambient music, and shoegaze was also very, very much into ethereal ambient sounds and things of that nature. So in a way, I saw a parallel between the two, and it just made sense to combine it. And at the same time, there were a lot of other bands who were doing the groundwork for that. We had things like Seafeel, My Bloody Valentine to some extent. Bands like Inside, Moon, what is it? Moonshake, and even more popular artists like say Bjork, who she's obviously not a shoegaze artist, but that second record that she had, or it was the second or the third, I forget, the Homogenic record, where he got the guy from LFO, a really famous electronic music artist from the UK around that time. She got him to produce her record, and her record to me was like a really cool marriage of like traditional, quirky Bjork style music with a electronic IDM-ish sort of like back end. And I think also around that time, Mark Clifford from Seafield, he remixed 4 tracks by the Kata Twins, and that got released into an EP. And it's basically like, the electronic music style, dubby, gritty electronic sound of Seafield as a back end for like an ambient sort of remix version of the Kata Twins. And that was like really, that was like, for me, that basically said, yeah, this is like I had this idea of like, yeah, shoegaze and electronic music, like there's a lot of similarities. And then these records came out and I'm like, oh yeah, these guys are doing it. It's totally doable. It totally makes sense. And that kind of led the groundwork for that.
Mm-hmm. So like, as you guys were sort of in the underground scene, were there any artists you were like friends with that you think deserve more recognition today, or that you liked?
I would say there was a band that did shoegaze in the 90s, 2000s called Half String, and they're from Arizona. It's more instrumental, it's like ethereal, kind of like 480 sounds. But I don't know if they are known that well. But yeah, I think they always get overlooked somehow when I read articles about like the shoegaze bands, and it's all listed. You just hear all the time the popular ones. But
yeah,
I thought they were like one of the pioneers as well for that sound, because they had like a more sort of spacey kind of full, like really wet. So they kind of made that other side of shoegaze, which is less drony, like wall of noise, but more like the ethereal kind of
like dreamy.
spacey sound.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish more people knew about them. So we're
Mm-hmm.
not friends, but we did connect through emails back then.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually reissuing their records through Darla.
Oh.
Um, so hopefully that those records will gain traction and people will discover Half String.
Yeah, I do like their album Maps for Sleep, but I think Captured Tracks reissued, or maybe they didn't, their other album after Maps for Sleep. I think it was like, I forgot the name. Well, anyways, that's good to know that their Darla's reissued.
Yeah, totally check it out. I think you can pre-order. I think for me, the only thing that I can think of is we have a label made called Technicolor, that started making music around the same time as we did, and started releasing music through Darla around the same time. Not really sure how many records he put out, but I always really enjoyed his music. It was really very mellow, kind of like with a pinch of trippiness, psychedelia type of thing, but sort of very mellow electronic instrumental music, with some really pretty melodies. And I think that I will love for those records to like get some traction as well.
Is who's Technicolor? Is that Justin LeBeau or?
Yeah, that's Justin LeBeau.
Yeah, I wonder what happened.
On a completely unrelated note, your outfit, Valerie, looks so good. Like they just look nice.
Thank you.
So you guys
Thanks.
are pretty popular now. Like I was over here pacing in circles, like wow, about to interview Sweet Trip. How do you feel about your popularity on like the internet, like just in total? Like, what's up?
Still feels weird. It still feels a little like we can't believe it too. So I mean, for myself, I just don't let it get to my head, and just we don't ever take for granted that for a long time we didn't know who our audience was. So we just try to acknowledge everybody, and if I get messages, I always respond. It just feel a lot of appreciation. Like we appreciate all of you, and it's great. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, it's really humbling. It's like in a way I'm kind of glad that the growth has been like this slow. Because I don't know, this might sound really funny, but like lately I've been watching a lot of documentaries from or like kind of like unofficial documentaries about bands from the 70s and bands from the 80s, and there's like the typical timeline of those bands getting famous of like struggling, releasing records, and then finally you get a hit record, and then it just like escalates to like excess and drugs and blah 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 and all this stuff. In a way, I'm kind of glad that wasn't our case, even though I don't think it would ever or will ever get to that point of like success. I guess we will never. In other words, we will never be Nirvana.
Well, I mean, it's hard for anyone to be Nirvana. That's a really high bar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I don't know, jokingly, but not really jokingly, I'm kind of glad that it all went that slow, because maybe right now we will be strung out on cocaine and heroin and not being homeless in the streets or so. But stupid comment aside, it is really humbling. I can't believe it, and it's really nice. It's really humbling, and it's really nice that people actually care about the music, in more of like a passing listening type of thing, that people do connect emotionally to the music, and a lot of people connect emotionally to the music, and that's really all I could ask for. Yeah.
It feels kind of cool that it's definitely a niche audience. Like it's still pretty underground, even though it's a lot of listeners, but it feels still pretty like niche. So it still has that cool factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the people who are liking the music are these eccentric creative types. So that in itself too is we also appreciate that aspect.
So what was the scene like when you were making music in 2003 compared to now?
I don't know. I think that at least for me, I sort of, I guess around that time, I sort of just disconnected a little bit from music, and scenes and what bands were popular and blah blah blah. I mean, I knew what bands were popular and I knew what people liked around that time. Um, but I don't know, it didn't like a lot of the music that was happening around that time didn't. Some of the music around that time didn't really make an impression on me to actually realize what was happening around us. Um, I think a lot of it has to do personally from just, I don't know, just being in situations that wouldn't like allow me the time to discover what was out there. And in many ways I was just like trying to just trying to power through and see where music would take me without really thinking about what was happening at the time. That said, you know, in the early 2000s, the whole IDM glitch stuff was getting more and more popular. I think a lot of independent artists were discovering the power of the computer and the flexibility of taking audio files and just destroying the crap out of them. And you know, while I was discovering a lot of those things, I also heard a lot of other artists and bands doing the same thing. A lot of bands, you know, just kind of like feeding off of the Otaker syndrome. So for a lot of like electronic music artists who are like really, really nerdy, probably including myself around that time, we will listen to these Otaker records and these Aphex Twin records and be like, holy shit, how do they do that? And I'm pretty sure that, you know, a lot of them, just like me, were just like pushing buttons and making hundreds and hundreds of mouse clicks per second just to like try to figure out how to make those sounds. And I think that might have been something that was really influential around that time, and something that I definitely noticed around that time. Aside from that, you know, as far as like what was popular in rock music, independent music, I had, you know, I know
Britpop.
Well,
Britpop was so huge then, 2000, like Blur and Pulp and
Really?
those kind of.
I
Wasn't
think
it?
yeah, I think you're right, and also like along with I think probably like the last wave of Britpop.
Oh, yeah,
There
it's
was
like Oasis or Verb or
Yeah, and there was like the resurgence of the garage bands, like the
Oh, yeah.
bands that had a garagey kind of
yeah,
sound. Like I think it was like the early 2000s that bands like the Brian Johnson Massacre started to get like a lot of attention. The Dandy Warhols, and then more popular bands like Jet, that other Swedish band that I'm forgetting the name of.
Cardigans.
Cardigans, yeah,
Cardigans.
yeah, totally.
Were-
Mhm.
So yeah, that was like the scene 2000s.
What are okay, Robbie and Valerie, what are some records you are currently listening to now? Like what do you find putting on?
Right now, I've just turned back to like the late 60s. Like this guitarist, Hungarian guy well, he's actually Hungarian American, born in Hungary, but lived in the US, Massachusetts for many years. You might have heard of him, Gabor Szabo. Anyway, he's like just recently I was flipping through like vinyl and I saw this cover which was like a John Austen illustration, and John Austen is like an English artist from like 1888 to 1948 or so, and he kind of drew these Art Deco illustrations, just black and white. And it kind of reminds you of Aubrey Beardsley's drawings. It's kind of sinister, but kind of creepy. So that's what drew me to the record. So then when I played it, it was like a treasure because it's basically like guitar jazz with elements of Eastern or Indian music and psychedelic. So it's got like a mysterious kind of spellbinding quality. And I don't know, I just kind of like that it puts you in under a spell. And the bass lines are pretty groovy that after a while it repeats and then you're like in this drone, but it's all very musical. It's not just one thing playing throughout the whole thing. It has very hypnotic feel to it. So yeah, the record is called Dreams, but yeah, I'm just kind of going through his discography because it's good to play it when you're like you want to be in a cerebral mood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gabor Szabo, Szabo.
For me, I've been going back to a lot of folk and psychedelic folk stuff that I like from like the 60s and early 70s. Been listening to this band called Pentangle that I really love, and I haven't listened to their music for a while. So I've been trying to listen to their stuff again because it is really good and it's really comforting, especially now. And trying to go back to a lot of those like psychedelic sort of like folk stuff from the 60s. There's this one guy, and I always forget his name. I'm pretty sure his first name is Davey. But he's a folk guitar player, and he's like super virtuoso guitar player guy that plays just beautifully, like super intricate, but also very beautiful. The stuff that he does, and actually, like I'm like I said, like I'm totally forgetting the name of the guy. I'm pretty sure that his first name is Davey. Even though I've been listening to his music for like over 10 years or so. But like the one famous track that he has that everyone who listens to folk music knows or should know is called Angie. It's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so I've been trying to listen to that a lot. And also Beach Boys. I think today, in fact, today I spent about an hour listening to the song called Darling by the Beach Boys on repeat for like 30 to 45 minutes or so.
Wow.
Oh, darling.
Yeah.
I love you.
That's cool. So, like, after a 12-year hiatus, what inspired you guys to recreate Sweet Trip or revive it?
Missing each other after so many years.
Yeah.
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 We lost touch, Robbie and I, and then when we reconnected, it was like, Robbie.
Mhm. That was basically it. Like I won't lie, like acknowledging the resurgence of interest in the band really helped, but I think that 90 to 95% of the resurgence of Sweet Trip was basically like missing each other and missing playing music together and hanging out. And when we reconnected, like the spark just like flew, and the excitement just poured out of both of us, or at least me. I mean, I don't know, but and that emotional reaction to reconnecting was the driving force to make music again. For me, anyway.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So your new album, what are some themes that it's about, or some aesthetics that you think are coupled with it? Like just details on the new album that you guys put out recently.
Well, the new album is the new album is basically it's basically a love letter. It's supposed to. I hope so. I hope that people get this, but it's supposed to be very, very romantic in a way. Every single song from beginning to end is about love and passion and emotions and things like that. And I think that we also well, yeah, like and we also sort of like reflected that aesthetic in the artwork of the record itself. Even though it is sort of like weird and kitschy and sort of tacky and cheesy, who knows, whatever, I acknowledge that, but that was the point. The point was to create something that kind of reflected the record, the context of the record, the aesthetics of the records, the emotions, the power of it. But not so like in your face, like in your face, like here is a big red heart because this record is all about love for one person. It's more like, yeah, this record is kind of like romantic and lush, but with romance and lush, you also get some kind of cheesy, funny things.
Yeah, like we also really love all the cheesy fireplace classic rocks, 70s romance rock type soft rock stuff. So if you see the album covers from that generation, they're like kind of opulent, and the wicker chair, and they kind of exaggerate the romantic sort of look to the cover. I don't know if you noticed those album covers from the 70s for like soft rock, like fireplace music kind of, what I'm talking about. Like Christopher Cross or some Paul, I'm blanking out. Well, if you're too young to know, then look it up.
Would Joni Mitchell be in that list? Joni Mitchell?
Yeah, kind of.
Romance rock, or
but more like things like Paul Davis.
Yeah.
I don't know, like
REO Speedwagon.
Yeah, totally. Things like that. Like if you were to like were to do a Google search for like AM classics, and then like get a list of songs, and then look up the artist, and then look up the record, the album covers and the record artwork, you'll probably get a better sense of that. Something funny that I heard recently in the less than a week or so was that there's this guy from Mexico who does a thing on YouTube where he reviews records, and he mentioned that the artwork for the new record reminded him of posters that you see at mariachi clubs in Mexico for like sort of like cheesy romantic Spanish type of music and stuff. And I'm also and the tone, his tone while he was saying that was sort of a disappointment. But when I heard that, I was like, yes, exactly. That's exactly, like, you got it right. You don't like it, but you got it right.
Yeah.
But also like I don't know, like I go to a lot of Vietnamese restaurants, and oftentimes in Vietnamese restaurants, the establishment has posters of concerts that are happening around that area. around the area, concerts by Vietnamese artists who come to the U.S. to like perform for the Vietnamese community. And a lot of those posters look really, really cheesy, but they're supposed to be romantic because a lot of the music is romantic, but the posters are like super, super cheesy. And that was like another aesthetic that we were kind of like drawn to
Yeah.
because it was
Yeah.
such an outlandish thing to consider by a Western band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So, do you have any plans to release more music or work on more music this year or in the following years?
I mean, as of now, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's as far as I can go. So
Yeah,
things,
that would be cool.
yeah,
Love
things
that.
things are happening. I'm doing a lot of like little demos here and there, and also trying to revisit a lot of old songs that we had in the like mid '90s or so, just to
Yeah.
see if there's anything like interesting there that we could either like redo a whole song that we had 30 years ago, or like pick and choose parts of whatever we had 30 years ago that could be expanded into something else. So yeah, I don't want to like say like, yes, we're gonna release a record every year.
Yeah.
But at least I can say that, you know, there is work is being done to hopefully have some music at some point. What point
Yeah.
and that point will be, I don't know, but yeah.
Ah, all right.
Working during the pandemic, did it affect your creative process at all?
No, not not at all. Well, well, maybe that's not true. I mean the pandemic affects everybody in different ways, but it affects everybody in some way. Um, I think that for me, it was it was definitely something to get used to. It was, it was a really hard, and it still is a really hard time. And I think that maybe it didn't affect the creative juices. I think it was more like the creative juices allowed, at least for me, it allowed me to cope with the pandemic. So it was more like being so like excited and like in bliss that I could, hang out with Valerie again and make music, and that grounded me somewhat to the whole pandemic situation. You know,
Yeah. It same for me. Like it didn't really devastate our plan, which was to make music, but I think it kind of made it more intimate when recording wise, because then we could have, who knows, like maybe took more time doing it, but during the pandemic, you not being able to socialize basically makes you more focused, I think.
Mhm.
And yeah, same, like you just spend more time doing the music because that's what you love to do. And like Robbie, it saved us from misery of what was going on around us with the pandemic.
Mhm.
yeah, I totally agree, and yeah, like what you said sort of made me think that if we had started working on this record and no pandemic ever happened, like that
Yeah.
just like never happened, it probably would have taken us a lot longer to finish it because we will be like just goofing off like we always do. Because like if Valerie and I were more I don't know, quote unquote professional, we could probably nail a record fairly quickly. But we're not that. I mean, we like, you know, we are very easygoing, and we you know, we enjoy our each other's presence, and you know, we can try to spend a whole day recording, but if like at any point of that recording time somebody says like, you want to go get ice cream, you know, the other person will be like, hell yeah. It's like, screw the recording. screw the fact that, you know, we should probably spend like another 4 hours to try to finish this
Yeah.
song.
Yeah,
And
like there's no ice cream store open. What do you do?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you know, I kind of lost my train of thought, but that's another thing that you said, Valerie, reminded me of.
Mhm. All right. So with that, I guess that concludes our questions. Thank you guys so much for agreeing to this and for taking the
Oh,
time
you're
out of your day
welcome.
to answer some of our